Welcome to the portrait drawing video. Today I am going to show you and demonstrate specifically how to draw portraits for our class, how we can work on the structure of the face and the proportions. So there are a couple of rules. The first rules apply to the eyes. So number one, when we are determining how far down the eyes are, we want to guess that it's about 50% of the way down the head. So what that means is that the top of the head is really where your hair comes in and not at the start of the forehead. The next thing is that each eye should be equal to each other in width, and the distance between them should be one eye width. Now the next rule is that your pupil and your iris need to be perfect circles. So as you can see, that is a perfect circle. Each of these that I am drawing here are circles to emphasize to you that the pupil needs to be directly in the center of the eyeball and the iris needs to be a perfect circle as well. Now both eyes need to be looking in the same direction. So if we are considering how an eye looks directly at you, we want our pupil and our iris to be perfectly centered in our eye. However, if they are moved to the right or the left, the pupil and the iris become ellipses. Now, when a photograph is taken, or if you are in any scenario where there is light on your face, there is a catch light that can be seen in your eye. That catch light needs to be in the exact same place on both eyes, regardless of where you put it. The nose is the second feature that we want to draw starting from the middle of the face. Now, the way that this was set up, the nose has essentially three sections to it, always has three sides. They are equal to each other in width, and they take up equal space on the face. Next, the inner corners of your eye should line up pretty exactly with the edges of your nose. Now, once we have those rules, we can move down to the mouth. So the lips are the third feature that we want to draw, and the outer corners of the lips are going to actually line up with kind of the start of the eye, sometimes the center of the eye, but you just need to know that the corners of the lips are going to generally line up with your irises. Now, the center lip line is never going to be straight. A lot of people are going to start out with a straight line. You are not going to do that. That straight line is going to confuse your viewer and it's not going to look very realistic. Now, when we talk about how to start out our portraits, we can go about it in two ways. We can do the circle and organic method, or we could do the trapezoid or geometric method. So the circle method is essentially when you start out with a perfect circle and then you add an organic shape for the bottom of that chin. The second part is to create a sectioned out trapezoid where the top half would represent your forehead. That bottom trapezoid is going to be angled a lot sharper, and that's going to represent your chin. And the area in between that rectangle is going to be where your nose and the start of your mouth are going to be. So the flat parts of your face. Now, if you do go about it that way, you can erase any of the trapezoids or any of the circles that are inside your face, and then you're left with a really good outline. Now, the difference between creating art that is Now, the difference between static lines and dynamic lines is the real difference between an amateur artist and a professional artist. Now, when we talk about static lines, essentially that means that we are creating lines the way that a lot of you already do. You're not doing anything gestural, you're doing it the best you can the first time, and if it doesn't work out, that's what you're left with. So as you can see, drawing a circle in this method is not easy. I'm not going to be able to get that as centered and beautiful as I want. However, if I do a dynamic line, that means a bunch of tiny, tiny lines that are gestured next to each other. They're dynamic, they're moving. The more I make them, the more correct I can get. So if I am using this method with my portrait drawing and I'm trying to get perfect circles, any shape similar, I am going to use dynamic lines, which is a collection of lines to create my image. This is the way that I go about drawing the face. I don't necessarily set it up to where I have a perfect circle or I do a trapezoid trick, but I kind of just generally measure out where I want that top of the head to be and the bottom of the chin to be. So when I'm drawing that face, I'm just kind of starting with that round top. I'm going down with flat sides on the rights and lefts, and I am using a symmetrical tool on my iPad right now, but the way that I normally do it is set up the same way. I would just finish it up on the right and left side. I would continue to go about it from the top to the bottom rather than doing the left side of the face and then the right. So we want that to be as symmetrical on the left and right as possible. So that means that that top of that forehead needs to be essentially the forehead, and the crown of the head needs to be a perfect circle shape. And as we go down, it can be a lot straighter until we hit the chin, where it needs to start angling down where that jaw is to where we hit our chin. When we move on to that center line of the eyes, the way that I drew this, I have it set up to where halfway down the face would not be a great spot to put my eyes. And the only reason that's true is because I didn't do a super broad crown of the head. So it's just a different style of working with this. And generally, when we talk about the top of the crown of the head, down 50% should be the eye level. But I did not start with the crown of my head. I started a little earlier. So I have my line drawn right about there. And that second line that I am drawing is going to be generally where I'm going to map out my nose, and that bottom line is going to be for my lips. And that's just kind of a good guide for me. Now, as you're going to see, I am going to shift and change these things. These lines that I'm doing here are mapping out generally where I want the eyebrows to start, where I want the inner corners of the eye to be, where I want the bottom of my nose to be, and where I want the Cupid's bow for my lips to go. So I'm going to start out by drawing the eyebrows, and when you do so, you kind of want to mark out the general shape of how you want your eyebrows to be. Typically, your eyebrows and any person's eyebrows are shaped in the same kind of arched manner. The rest of what I'm doing here is just kind of thickening in the eyebrows with a bunch of tiny little lines, and I'm adjusting the shape as best as I can. So when we start with the inner corner, that part that's actually not the whites of your eyes, but it's usually kind of a pink shade, those are essentially going to be 45-degree angles. I start from there and then I start to go outward. When I'm doing that, I'm actually pulling my lines towards the ends of my eyebrows, but it's not going to go quite that far. So the edge of your eyebrow might reach kind of the peak of your cheekbone, but it's not going to quite reach where the edge of your eye is going to be. Kind of round out the bottom and add some eyelids here. So eyelids are going to make your piece look a lot more realistic rather than having just an eyeball straight out of your eye without anything covering it. So that just really adds a little bit of realism very quickly. Now, I'm using this dynamic line method to get as perfect of a circle as I can acquire. And I'm doing this, although I have the tool to do a circle with this application, just to demonstrate to you that it's not going to be perfect the first time, and I'm going to continue to make those marks until I get it as close as I possibly can. Now I'm going to kind of check my work here and see about how well I did that circle and how centered it is. So I'm going to fill it in here, and I'm actually going to adjust the shape of the iris a little bit. Now, all of these kind of checking processes are things that you need to do with portraits, things you need to do in any sort of realistic drawing where you are attempting to create something from life. You are going to make mistakes, and that's okay, and you kind of just need to keep adjusting from there. So afterwards, I'm going to start to draw out the general shape of the ears. Now, everybody's ear size is different, but generally the tops of your ears are going to reach kind of that middle part of your eye. So the top edge is going to line up with that eyebrow eye area, and the bottom of the ears is going to generally line up with kind of that top of your lip. It needs to be really at the edge of your jawline. So at this stage, based on how I drew these ears, I'm actually going to adjust my jaw a little bit, and I'm going to change the shape of it. I'm going to thin it out a little bit so it looks a little bit more realistic. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start to draw my nose shape, starting out with that center line, and I am drawing outwards. So I have that middle line where your two nostrils are going to meet, and then I'm going to draw a comma, and that is going to kind of come out from that center line. Now it needs to be generally even on both sides. As we've said, we want these to be equally in sections with thirds. So here I have my center line. I draw my little comma shape kind of coming out, and you would do one on the left and one on the right. I'm doing a symmetrical tool, but that's how you would go about it. Then last, I am going to add the edges of the nose, those kind of curved lines right about there. From that point, I can round it. I can give that top part of the nose kind of some structure, and I'm going to draw essentially where it's going to meet my eyebrows from the bottom. I adjusted the shape of my chin based on the way that this nose looked because I am not drawing a person from real life. I'm not attempting to make this person look like anybody specific. And so I'm able to kind of make these rules for myself and judge based on the proportion and determine how I want to change the shape of the face. So at this point now, I'm going to do the top line of the lip where your Cupid's bow meets your lips. And I'm going to start to draw outwards with my lip lines and get that top lip correct. Now, I want to kind of have that center curve where your Cupid's bow is, and that is going to extend outward in kind of an arch. So we want kind of that M shape for the top of your mouth. When we hit the edge of the top lip, it needs to line up generally with the center of your eyes, as we have discussed before, and I'm checking my work here, and it looks like I'm about good. Now I'm going to draw the center line of the lips, and as we've discussed, it can never be a straight line. So I want that to kind of follow a similar line to a straight line, but I want it to have a little bit more depth. I'm going to do that bottom line of the lip where it is going to meet the bottom of my chin and the bottom lip shape. That needs to essentially be straight on the bottom and be curved up into your inner corners of your mouth. I'm going to add my depth for my chin in that little shape here. And now at this stage, I'm going to start to adjust and correct my proportions, add some details, and then I will continue with my portrait. One of the examples is that I noticed that these eyes were a little bit too skinny, so I added a little bit of width to them on the right side and the left side, and we're going to go from there by adding hair, adding eyelashes, and different specific lines of the nose and the lips. I'm actually going to draw lashes in this way where it is going to be thick into thin shapes for how I am going to do from the inner corner to the outer corner. Now the bottom of your eyes should have lashes as well, but they are going to be much shorter. All of your lashes are essentially coming out from that radial symmetry of your iris, and they're being kind of pulled away from that. So that's why some of the ones that are straight above the eyelid are going straight up, and the ones that are farther to the right or farther to the left are going to pull away from that general center line of your pupil. But we want it to go from thick to thin as we go along. Now that I have my eyelashes, I am going to move on to another detail, which is going to be my hair. So I'm actually going to draw where that kind of middle part should be, and your part can be really anywhere. But I'm going to draw that middle part and kind of draw out the general shape that I want for that hair. I'm going to start to add those hair strands, kind of pulling away from the scalp, and I'm going to start adding a little bit of texture here. And now that makes that forehead look a lot more believable. So I'm adding all of these strands of hair, and I'm actually thinning out the edge of the chin while I'm doing that, thickening up depending on how the volume looks on your particular portrait. I'm going to erase the lines that I used to help me measure. And I'm actually going to do kind of a line here for that cheekbone. Now that can be really important depending on how you want your person to look. And I'm doing that same kind of radial symmetry where all of the lines of my lip, where the wrinkles of your lip are actually going to curve around rather than just being straight down. We want that to look like it's wrapping around that surface of your lips. Next thing I do is I'm going to draw that catch light, and I want it to be exactly the same on the left and right so that it looks believable. And that catch light is actually going to hit that top right on both eyelids just above the pupil. From here, I am good to go. So this is a general format for how you can perform any portrait. If you want to base it off of someone from life, you can follow the same general rule. This example was a portrait, a believable portrait that is not of anyone specific, so I was able to take some creative liberties with how I proportioned the face and what details I added. So that is up to you how you want to go about creating your portraits. If you want to do someone who's real or if you want to make someone up.